Stephen A., are you okay with baseball players policing themselves?
I hate it. I always have, I always will. And it's for one reason and one reason only. It's America's national pastime. It's associated with the past in certain ways that we don't need to get into at this particular moment on this show, but every damn body knows what I'm talking about. And as a result of that, it's a license that's not accorded to sports like football and like basketball. Essentially, sports dominated by African Americans in terms of its populace, for the most part. Now, we just talked weeks ago, Max Kellerman, about how baseball, in terms of its African American population, makes up about 6.7% of the baseball populace. Now, obviously, you have Latino players that make up over 27%. The rest are pretty much white players. And obviously, they've always had a strong players union, which assists in a lot of things that they're able to get away with because the league can impose but so much of its will, because unlike the other sports, at least in years past, the Players Association wasn't perceived as being nearly as strong as Major League Baseball. And to be honest with you, I think that's still the case. As a result, because it's perceived as a predominantly white sport, it's America's national pastime, to the point where antitrust laws and things of that nature favored them for decades, more so than it had favored National Football League or the National Basketball Association. I think it lends itself towards a culture that has never gone away, thus enabling Major League Baseball to consistently drag its feet. I'm not talking about the league office. I'm talking about the players as an association, the players as a body of individuals. Let's put this stuff into consideration. You got the NBA. You had stuff like a dress code. You ain't never heard about anything like that in baseball. In football, you have all these rules and regulations emanating from the league office because we have to do whatever it takes to protect ourselves, whether it's concussion issues or beyond, safety issues, et cetera, et cetera. You even have, four ladies that are now in the league office presiding over the league's domestic violence policy and things of that ilk. You don't hear about that with Major League Baseball. And then on top of it all, here we are with Major League Baseball. So let me get this straight. You can't hit somebody in the head playing on the football field trying to tackle them. But you can throw 95, 96, 98 mile per hour fastballs at a dude's head. And all of a sudden, all you get is the umpire pointing at both dugouts, giving warnings, and ultimately throwing you out. And then you might get suspended for 7 games out of 162 games in a year. You can throw 95 mile per hour fastballs at anywhere from a dude's head to a dude's kneecap. And then you're allowed to sit back and say, y'all mind y'all business. We will police ourselves. This is not about the league. This is about the public allowing baseball players to get away with stuff they would never allow football players to get away with. They would never allow NBA players to get away with. And I'm going to say it again. Those sports have a vast majority of African Americans playing in their sport. So everybody preaches control. But when it comes to baseball, vast majority of white players, we have folks sitting back saying, well, that's the way it's always been. I find that to be incredibly alarming.
Well, I wish we could have a topic here where we get into a heated debate, as is often the case on this show. But there's no debate here, Stephen A. Smith. I think you hit the nail on the head. The fact of the matter is there's a patronizing attitude toward leagues that are considered black leagues, African-American leagues predominantly, the NFL and especially the NBA. And there's a different attitude culturally in terms of the way the media covers it, and certainly in terms of, as you mentioned, the players' union's disposition toward policing themselves, and even what the league allows for in terms of policing themselves toward leagues that are considered predominantly white. Especially, you look at baseball, the history of baseball, it is rural and Rust Belt, working class, descendants of Western Europeans, or at least that's the dominant culture, because it actually comes from all over Europe and really all over the world. But that became the dominant culture. And the idea that they can police themselves is partly, look, we have our way of doing things. Don't tell us how to do it. But in the NBA or the NFL, which is especially the NBA, was considered once upon a time to have an image problem, primarily because the faces in the NBA were faces of color. There's a patronizing attitude there's an infantilizing attitude, and this ties into, you want to talk about the sociology of it. I mean, to racial slurs, including the use of the word boy to refer to a man as a boy. It's a patronizing attitude that infantilizes the subject of the attitude. They somehow black or African American or people of color can't police themselves. They need to be policed. And by the way, you can talk about hockey too, where part of the game is policing yourself. You wind up on a power play. There aren't like long suspensions. They're fighting, just a power play. And same thing in baseball, obviously. Well, let them. And I think that there's a civilizing force, hopefully. You hope there's progress here, where increasingly people are more outraged by the kind of unwritten rules of baseball and what you can get away with. And this subject is starting to be treated differently, at least in the media. But for years, it was like, oh, that's kind of what they do. They throw baseballs at each other. But in the NBA, God forbid, someone show up to a press conference without a tie. So absolutely, racial attitudes, I think, play into this in an insidious way. So that's to address your point. And then the larger point is you shouldn't be able to throw a deadly object, 95 miles an hour at someone's head. That's common sense.